For the third time this season, we get the Rams and the Seahawks. This one is for a trip to the Super Bowl. Let's get into the biggest storylines heading into the NFC Championship. Jeff, these two teams have played each other tight all season. This Seahawks defense, though, is playing even better, even faster. Let's start there. On that side of the ball, how do you even begin to plan for this defense?
Well, for the Rams, it's not like, any of this is, new to them. No, very much, a veteran team, certainly have spent, countless years in the playoffs under their current regime and structure of their roster. You have to be of the mindset that, like, look, we just got to be who we are,
Right.
and obviously
They've
Seattle,
been here before, the Rams.
no doubt. Seattle's intimidating. There's just no way around it. You understand
Hmm.
that. And maybe more so for teams that, are kind of unfamiliar, not teams that play in the NFC West.
Right.
What are you going to do? We got to feature Puka Nakua. We've got to hopefully, sustain some kind of ground attacks with Kieran Williams,
Hmm.
Tay Adams. You just play with what you've always done, which is always something that, at certain points for teams, I think they get into matchups where they kind of just outthink themselves. And
Mm.
you certainly shouldn't be doing this, this time of year, certainly shouldn't be doing an NFC championship game. Whatever you did, through, how many games you've played to this point, you've proven to yourself that obviously your product works, your
Yes.
theories, your game plan, it works. You can't get intimidated basically by the big bad bully.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean it's going to work, obviously, with the way Seattle is performing,
Yeah.
on the defensive side of the ball right now. And again, we talked about this the other day: long, lean, fast, big
Yep.
guys everywhere. I mean, their secondary, most of their secondary is built like linebackers. So, I mean,
Yes.
when they, want to attack and get physical, it's right up the alley of the strength of what, this Seattle back seven personnel has.
Hmm.
Certainly if you're McVay, certainly if you're Stafford, you're at this point now, where you're obviously trying to keep this going, and Stafford, you don't know how many more of these you got left. And
Exactly.
there was certainly the opportunity that, Chicago probably could have played that game better and maybe taken that game from the Rams on Sunday. But I think it was one of those ones where, a team being a little bit more veteran laden, a little bit more understanding of the situation, they were essentially able to play the long game and basically stall out the Bears till they had the advantage to take it.
Right.
You're not going to have this opportunity against the Seattle team, but you can't go in there and just try to reinvent the wheel. We all know who the top
Yeah.
playmakers are for the Los Angeles Rams, and they have to be featured.
They definitely do, and you said it. We've talked about it all season. Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, and then we've talked about how good that backfield is with not only Kieran Williams but Blake Corum as well. They've got to be feeling so confident after that win over the Bears, especially just with how it all went down and how it ended. They've got to be carrying a lot of that confidence over into this one.
Yeah, I mean, you figure you go there. Obviously, the weather was certainly, not in the Rams' favor.
Hmm.
Seattle, the weather's not always as friendly, but the one thing you're not going to get is, basically single digit temperature. Certainly can get a little, fluky up there in the Pacific
Yeah.
Northwest, but you're not usually seeing single degree temperature. Look, you have a Hall of Fame quarterback. I mean, I'm sorry, you have a, Super Bowl winning quarterback. You have a Super Bowl
Yeah.
winning head coach. You have to feel, even if you want to talk yourself into it and lie yourself into it, look, we got an advantage here. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
For Seattle, they're not that experienced yet as the way they are currently structured. So you
Hmm.
you just have to believe in what you can do. Obviously, the offensive line is going to be huge because if you
Yeah.
can't get Kieran Williams going, I don't think you want to be in a position where you're going to rely on 40 plus pass attempts to win the game. I mean, certainly Matt Stafford can pull it off if he has to, but hopefully
Hmm.
some balance. And the thing that I think is going to be really difficult, and this happened to San Francisco right out of the gate, is there's usually a tidal wave coming from Seattle. The thing is whether or not you can withstand it.
Right.
The problem was, for San Francisco, the tidal wave felt like the first 40 minutes of the game, and by the time San Francisco could even peak out, it
Yeah.
was, well without reach. And, I think Seattle also probably has to have that mindset as well, is like, we can't just, rely on on a quick drubbing, a quick knockout, if you will. You have to
Right.
understand that there's a possibility here that this game could go 60, if not even 72 minutes. There's a real good opportunity this game could go longer than that. And
Yeah,
Seattle's
I
going to also be
agree.
of the mindset to play, the long game, not necessarily the sprint.
Sam Darnold has struggled against the Rams as we've seen. What do we expect to see from him in this one, and how much will that injury factor in?
That's the thing, because when we saw him on Saturday night, I wouldn't say it was visible that he was hampered, but, looking at the way Seattle basically called the game, I think they were more confident in their running ability as opposed to maybe whatever percentage health-wise Sam Darnold was.
Right.
This will be, I guess, what, 10 days or so after the initial injury. They're gonna get the extra day as they played Saturday night. They'll get the opportunity this week,
Yep,
obviously, to
that's
play
right.
on Sunday. But yeah, this is where it all kind of fell apart for Sam Darnold last year,
Mhm.
right? It was the Rams. The Rams kind of came as Achilles' heel last year with the Minnesota
Yeah.
Vikings, and certainly opened up the opportunity that here he is now sitting, with the Seattle Seahawks. For Sam, don't overplay it, and this is where
Mhm.
Sam can kind of get it. And I know you love to bring up the ghost aspect to it, but this is where it gets with Sam Thomas. Sam, like, yes, you are on the best team right now in the NFC. Yes, you are the number 1 seed, but that does not mean in the same breath that, you should necessarily be going out there and saying, "Oh, man, I'll get into a shootout with, Matthew Stafford, no problem at all." Because usually when you
Yeah.
have to have, Sam Darnold, throwing the ball, 35 more, it's just, more opportunity, for some miscues, for some hiccups from Sam Darnold, which is,
Mhm.
kind of led to why, he's been a good quarterback, but kind of led to why he never really got this opportunity that he does have now with Seattle. Um, and this is obviously big for him because this isn't just a 1-year thing. He's committed to Seattle.
That's
Seattle is
right.
committed to him. So you've got to do what you can necessarily. You're going to be down a little bit as far as the running game with Charbonnet out.
Mhm.
Kenneth Walker had a great game against San Francisco. He's another one of these guys, and him and Kieran Williams, I kind of feel the same way about. I think both are really good backs. Both maybe don't necessarily get the respect that they deserve. They always
Mhm.
find a way to be solid producers. I don't think the quarterbacks are going to cross each other out. But what you're hoping is that between Sam Darnold and the Seattle running game,
Yeah.
that's enough to hopefully maybe overcome what Matthew Stafford's going to be able to do with all the weapons at his disposal.
Doesn't hurt having a guy like Jackson Smith and Jigba to throw to. Kenneth Walker did play super well against the Niners, 116 yards and 3 touchdowns. Can he carry the Seahawks backfield without Charbonnet? Obviously, they'd love to have him in this one, but he did really, really well in his absence.
Yeah, there's no question. And, this is one where I'm not necessarily sure you're going to get the ball up the middle against the Rams. And a lot of the
Okay.
damage Walker did do Saturday night against San Francisco 49ers was kind of the outside. Kenneth Walker, again, just he's not going to light you up with athleticism. But, I like to say with some of these guys like this, one of their, highest level of athleticism is their intelligence. And Kenneth Walker just sees extremely well. He
Hmm.
has, he has some of the best vision out of any running back in the league. And that's why he's
Right.
been as productive as he has, even though he might be a little bit limited athletically compared to some of his peers. So yeah, you're gonna obviously if you're Seattle, I think you have to get on that a little bit early. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? But, if I'm scripting 10 plays, I want maybe 4 because I want to see where I'm at with Kenneth Walker. You know what I'm saying? I want to see what
Right.
kind of success we're having early. Not that I'm gonna scrap it, but knowing that maybe Sam Darnold is not 100%, if I
Hmm.
can maybe lean on the run game a little bit more than I would, generally want to or have to, I know that I have that ability. And if Kenneth Walker is, because it'll be a mistake, obviously, if Kenneth Walker gets out and gets rolling early, that
Hmm.
you're just going to start throwing the pill around a little bit more. You want to make sure that you get Kenneth Walker as involved as you can. And if he can dictate this for you offensively, obviously it'll help you as far as, again, whatever percentage Sam Darnold's playing at. You
Hmm.
also, obviously, we saw a lot of rollouts. They were trying to limit the amount of contact that Darnold was going to take.
Right.
I don't think that's going to change probably this week. Um, so the key to that, of course, though, is that Kenneth Walker can go out there and be productive, and obviously those
Yeah.
5 offensive line in front of him, that should make things easier for the Seahawks offensive game plan. Hopefully, things a little bit easier for Sam Darnold if they
Yeah.
do decide they have to dial back the amount of pass attempts they feel comfortable with him throwing.
I think this is going to be another tight one. Both of the regular season meetings swung on late mistakes and turnovers. The more I think about it, I just have to wonder if one short field could end up deciding this one because it could just go so many different ways.
I think you're, probably pretty spot on with that thought process because, the later in the postseason you get, there is the opportunity to press. There is the
Hmm.
opportunity of, man, I have to, I need it. I have to have it. And, sometimes that, doesn't always put you in, the position to be making, basically, your best brain decisions. Sometimes, the emotion can get you, caught up and you maybe, you feel something that's there that's probably isn't. Um, if that's the case, I think you would probably have to worry a little bit about Sam Darnold here, because we know in
Yep.
these types of situations, that has kind of been a little bit of an issue. But Seattle comes in, strong punter, strong kicker. But I do think if there was a possibility, for a turnover that could be of significance, I just look at this, Seattle secondary, and
Yeah.
it can come from there. It really feels like one of those guys, and obviously all of them, the great athletes that they are, the ability once the ball's in their hands, it can be, taken to the house.
Mhm.
It's going to be a good one. Kudos to the NFC West. We couldn't, stop gushing on this division the entire season, and kind of makes sense. It feels about right that two of those teams here are going to compete for the right to go to the Super Bowl. But for Seattle, hey, you got one huge factor, of course. This game
Yep.
is in Seattle, and it is not in Los Angeles.
Yes, exactly. And we saw the just how like you could see the building shaking right from the Rashid Shaheed touchdown right off the start. Just unbelievable environment there. My favorite place to watch a live NFL game. Who do you have winning this one? What is your score prediction? I know we both have the Seahawks winning the Super Bowl. I do think the Rams are a tougher test for them than both of these teams in the AFC. That might age poorly, but this to me looks like the tougher game. I think it's going to be close. I still have the Seahawks in this one just because of that defense. What's your score prediction?
No, I agree with you. Could be the odd scenario where maybe the championship game could be easier than the Super Bowl. That probably is a really
Right.
solid point right there. One of those things probably has to do, obviously, with Denver and the injury, of course. Um,
Mm.
I think it's going to be close. It's not going to be like it was Saturday night, where basically, it felt like a microwave game. Within 10 minutes, it was over. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I think this one is, going to go closer to 60, and I do think there is probably a pretty good chance this thing might go a little bit more than 60. But
Yeah.
the fact that it is in Seattle, the fact that Seattle has so much momentum going right now, the physicality that the Seattle team plays with, guys who are just not shrinking away from the moment. Here's a guy like Rashid Shaheed,
Hmm.
those years down in New Orleans, now with an opportunity on a bigger stage, obviously embracing that, taking, that by the horns. And, I said it the other day, and, to think that we could be getting to the point where one of the quarterbacks from the 2018 NFL draft class is about to make it to a Super Bowl, and it's Sam Darnold, I
Yeah.
think is just absolutely, just great to see. But I think Seattle, I would probably say, if I'm figuring a 60-minute game or a little bit longer, figure Seattle by 3. It's going to be a tight one, but it should be a hell of a football game.